お待たせいたしました。これより TE-02
So now we'd like to start TD02. And the presentation is entitled Develop an Enterprise-Wide Cloud Adoption Strategy. This will be given from Miha Kralj, Principal Architect.
Hello and thank you. I'm actually really honored that you decided to come to my session among all of the other sessions that are available for you during the Tokyo AWS Summit. So thank you again for being here. I hope that we'll have a great 40 minutes together. My name is Miha Kralj, and as you heard, I am one of the solution architects that is helping, particularly in the large global and strategic segment, mostly helping them on structuring very large and very complex journeys to the cloud. So by doing that for about 2 years, we actually found, I was personally involved, for example, in a General Electric migration, in Shell, doing quite some work also with other, I did quite a decent amount of work in a Suncorp in Australia. So personally, together, myself and my team, we found huge amount of repeatable roadblocks that we always hit when we start to talk about large-scale migrations towards the cloud. You heard in previous presentation, if you listened to Stephen before me, you heard about mostly high-level strategic objectives, and I will go a little bit into IT strategy later today as well. But definitely what I hope that we will get together out from this session today, it is that you get a very quick flyover of Cloud Adoption Framework, which is a structured set of perspectives, how to structure thinking and discussion, how to actually do a good large-scale transition from traditional computing towards cloud computing. It's a very short session, so don't expect that I will teach you anything very much deep into a detail, because we have a very, very vast area of space to cover. So let's roll straight into it. I hope that I will give you enough of practical examples throughout the journey today. Let me start first with a very unusual situation when I got into it first, but then I realized that it is occurring more often than I thought. Lots of customers we see actually start playing with Amazon Web Services without actual business case behind. And then they go through specific proof of concept, or maybe to do a prototype or do a pilot, and then they like it. But there is a great danger not to have a business case behind and actually have a very good strategic plan. Why are you going to the cloud? So one of the things that we found is that we frequently engage with customers where we need to go back a step, and we need to actually start asking questions. Why are you using us? Why do you want to be in the cloud compared to the traditional computing? So through that, we started to use various techniques and various approaches. The one that I'm going to show you here, that's called Norton Kaplan Strategy Map. So we started to look into different views, different perspectives. Why would somebody want to get into the cloud? And we are starting with the most obvious one, that somebody wants to really manage and control costs of IT organization, that somebody wants to enable much faster creation of the value. But then we try to dig deeper and deeper, and we have a very well-defined set of questions that we try to find together with the customers, either what is your internal or external customers' need, what is the internal or external business perspective, and at the end, quite interestingly, we found that we can always add into the business case reasons like promoting the culture of innovation, or acquiring new skills, acquiring new type of abilities to do on a learning and growth dimension, things that you can never really do in a traditional IT. And that can be a very big chunk of the business case as well, because cloud will help you to morph your IT people as well, as you will see. Now, this is also something where we started to look into where is the true value actually coming from? How do we redefine what value really is when it comes to the cloud computing? And historically, if you're looking on a tactical side, value is always defined, it is benefits minus detriments. It's a very simple equation that you can actually quantify mathematically. But then it comes down to the questions, what are the detriments that we are trying to avoid? What are the things that we try to lower? So we try to define that you want to lower the cost, of course. Everybody is talking how cloud is lowering their capital expenditure, cloud is lowering operational expenses. Maybe cloud can actually allow that you can grow while maintaining the very small cost footprint. On the other side, you can also lower the risk. So lowering the risk is very interestingly observed that we are actually helping customers to protect their reputation. So for example, cloud can be much more dynamically scalable and will never go into denial of service. So you are avoiding a risk that your typical data center would otherwise have. We can help you to be compliant much faster with much less effort because we already did a whole bunch of compliancy certifications beforehand. We can actually allow you to prevent any major disruptions to your business through all of the various models of global availability, high scalability, and resiliency of your systems that can run on a cloud. So the detriment side is easy. The benefit side then becomes much more interesting because we are starting to look into, can we increase the speed? A typical question we are asking in a value equation is, how long does it take to get a new IT system up and running? Does it take months or weeks or days or minutes? How actually efficient your workforce can be because you can dynamically scale up and down. You can maybe give much higher compute power during the day for a testing environment and then turn it off during the night when no testing is happening. But also the whole agility that you can respond way faster to market changes. On the strategic side, we also found a greater and greater number of customers that actually really care about IT innovation as a big value part of that whole value story. That they can turn, with the help of a cloud computing, IT can really turn into IT as a service. That internally you can start playing with experiments and you can do a very quick, rapid, short cycle type of playouts and do the hackathons inside your organizations. Or probably the most advanced, most mature customers would actually look into the cloud that supports completely new business models, from completely unbundling things that were hardly linked together before, all the way to offering a long tail. That's, by the way, a great book to read, the same title, Long Tail. The value proposition here, you can see it goes from left to right. Lowest amount of add-on value from the cloud is actually on the left side of this slide, goes towards the highest amount of value on this side of the slide. So we went down the path of trying to see all of the business discussions that we have with business audiences, that we have with business units, with business managers, and actually we put together the whole business perspective, as we call it. You saw two components from a business perspective in here, but it's very important to understand anything within the business perspective tries to answer one very simple question: why? Why do you want to do all of that? So where is the value that you are trying to achieve? Why is your IT strategy defined to include the cloud, or maybe why not? Here is a very simple explanation why you need that type of a perspective in all of your planning sessions that you have it. When you start working on a cloud, that's what we found again and again with many different enterprises. It's always a honeymoon period at the beginning. And that honeymoon period, when it fades away and you still do, let's say, application migration, one app every day and next day, and the team at the beginning was super excited and was super happy with new technology and with the cloud, 6 months later, it becomes tiring, hard work, as all the work is. So you need to have that kind of a north, the true north. Why are you doing all of this? Where Why did we start that journey at the beginning? Where are we going with the cloud? And that whole business perspective is trying to keep that answer very, very clear. That's why we always recommend you don't need to have too much of a business perspective, but just enough that whenever somebody is in doubt, that you can always go back to the basics. Why are we doing it? Well, I know that this is much more technical conference, so let's look into how are we doing it from a technical side. So how exactly do we use cloud technologies for the new things? Now, here is one of the very common problems that I saw again and again and again. When we talk to particularly large IT organizations, they always ask us to provide IT capabilities. For example, predictive analytics or collaboration suite or any of high granular type of IT capabilities. And what do we give them as an answer? We say, oh, we have Elastic MapReduce or we have EC2, which are very, very atomic cloud services. They are super well defined and they are super scalable and secure, but still those two things don't have much in common. And that's why instead of kind of trying somehow to fulfill requests from customers on IT capability and give them our services, we did create a stepwise approach. So every IT capability we break apart into workloads. Every workload we break apart into various stacks, and every stack we then decompose into templates, and then templates are actually driven by our cloud services. And you can see the triangle that is drawn is actually based on level of importance for our customers. We always try to listen what customers need. But once you start to decompose it, it actually turns into a tree, into a root system. You start with your trunk on top, and that trunk splits apart into many workloads. Every workload goes into stacks, and so on and so on. At the end, at the bottom layer, we have many, many, many different cloud services that you want to use in order to serve a couple of very large IT capabilities. That model really, really helps particularly enterprise architects and business architects to understand where does that modern, small, granular cloud service, where does it actually fit? So we need to create that like a translation layer. Just for completeness, this picture is missing the real top layer, which would be business capability. So we want to first make sure that this translation at the moment is really well covered, and then we'll create the last step going from IT capability up to a business capability. And with that, we will complete the circle for having mapping from business capabilities all the way down to the bottom to the cloud service. Now, when it comes to exact discussion with the technical architects, when we want to explain which service specifically to use for which functionality, we started to look into how a typical modeling is done. And we actually divided all of our services into three big blocks. We talk about foundational services, platform services, and application services on top. And then we start to look into all of those little components that we have there. First, at the bottom layer, we have a networking and security and storage and compute. And then we started to lay up higher and higher and higher. We actually created the complete stack of a server side or service side options that are available. That, of course, is not complete. We need on top first to have protocols in between and clients. So either client can be a browser or an email client or a mobile app or something like that. So with that canvas, we sit down with solution architects, with operational architects, and with infrastructure architects. And for example, we design a web application. You can look at it as a pattern. You see on top browser over HTTP, connects to, it looks like to a Tomcat that sits on Java. That Java is pulling something out from a relational database. The reason that relational database is blue, it looks like it is fully managed relational database by cloud providers. So you don't need to care what it sits on, what instance and what the size of a storage is. On the other side, it looks like that Java sits on top of a version of Linux, actually on BSD. that is on compute optimized, that is sitting on top of elastically scalable, and name resolution service is used as well. What is very interesting is that actually this canvas has all of our services listed on it without actually naming any one of them. And that's how we see that we can help architects in organizations to model applications with a neutral terminology and actually say, well, our app behaves this way. This is the pattern. And then later I have a different, I keep the pattern on top. I just replace the canvas with our specific services from AWS portfolio. This is another type of a model, which is a mobile app, right? Mobile app on top over REST protocol goes down to a Python that then either goes to DynamoDB, which is NoSQL, or sits on top of a Linux on several type of instances, the general one and compute optimized and so on and so on. You can imagine how you can start playing and decomposing either existing applications or starting to model new applications for the cloud straight on top of this canvas. Now, again, I just gave you a glimpse into two components from that second perspective, which we call a platform perspective. Initially, actually, my preferred name was architecture perspective, but we realized that architecture now has so many different meanings, from very deep coding and engineering all the way to enterprise architecture. At the end of the day, we decided to avoid it, and we rather call it a platform perspective. But we are offering huge amount of very good prescriptive guidance, particularly for architects, software architects, solution architects, and infrastructure architects, so they can either plan, design, or optimize their architectures. Now, when we are looking into how do we properly sequence all of that together, historically, most of the vendors always like to talk about various maturity models. And maturity models, for example, CMMI, usually goes from level 1 up to level 5, and then based on certain questions, you are at a certain stage and you need to move forward to the next stage. We found out that cloud is so agile that actually that type of maturity model does not fit really well for a journey. Because the only thing it will do, it will find what is your current state, and it will say you can move forward one step. So instead of that, we actually created a state machine. We create slightly different type of a graph or a state machine depending where we find that enterprise. This one that you see here actually was created for one US institution. You see the bold black lines? By the way, this graph, you need to look into the lines. Don't look into the boxes. States, boxes, are way less important than transitions, which are lines. So it's not that important that you start at traditional, which would be probably a typical state for most of the traditional enterprises. It's much more important that you can see on this state machine that our first journey goes towards cost reduction, and then we go towards innovation stimulation, and then we will go towards the growth stimulation. Every enterprise, every company has a different journey. And different journey has different intents. Sometimes they are clashing with each other. Sometimes we need to find the right order of execution. So we created that model that has a different, for every customer, we try to find the most optimized direction towards the leading type of the organization. Not everyone actually gets to the leading state, but at least this gives you a very clear, different approaches. And once you decide which journey you want to do, for example, if you want to go after complexity reduction, which would be the first line going from the traditional up to innovate. So how do you reduce complexity? Which technologies do you want to use? What do you do with your teams? What is your overall strategy? What are the services that you will consume? That's totally different set of applications and workloads and services compared to if you want to empower experimentation. So instead of talking about all of our web services that we offer, based on the journey, we can actually zero down and we say, all we need to talk at the beginning is compute and storage. Or maybe we say, all we need to talk about is MapReduce and machine learning. for a different type of a journey, and so on and so on. So all of that, as I said, the lines matter way more than the boxes. With that, once we know where you want to go and we know where you are, we start to look into different gaps. And we can't just assign one score and say, you get the number 28 out of 100, because it will tell you nothing. So we started to look, how do we actually assess the maturity? First, we looked across the whole life cycle. You can see we are talking about the plan, build, and run, 3 big pillars. Plan goes into strategy and analysis, build has design and transition, and the running part has the operations and improvement. And then we also sliced it horizontally. The first big slice is IT management, the second slice is governance, risk, and compliance, and the last slice is technology and architecture. What do we do with all of that? There are a whole bunch of questions, and we don't really go and ask all of the questions. We kind of, lots of things together through assessment. We actually find out, where are you leading? Where are you just okay? Where are you really trailing? So in this case, of course, red means bad or it requires improvement. Yellow and green are good or great, and the blue one would be an excellent example that is worth capturing and sharing, which means kind of far ahead of the industry. What do we do with that? We grab all the reds and we create the remedy plans and say, well, in your case, the reason for cost and billing in this case, this is a practical example from one customer, they had one cost center that got one budgeting cycle per year. So when you go to cloud computing and we are giving you the micro billing every month for every service, for every instance, all of those super micro transactions, and you just kind of bring them all together and dump into your one cost center. That's not ahead. So you need to restructure cost centers accordingly if you really want to do the show back, if you want to do the charge back. So in this case, customer was relatively behind with their cost and billing structure in order to fully utilize cloud services. And I could talk you through all of those that are red on this slide. But again, that's much more details you can get either through reading our white papers or maybe attending some other sessions that we just focus on that. So I showed you 2 other models from what we call a maturity perspective, which tries to answer when are we doing what. So in a maturity perspective, we squish together a whole bunch of different components that are particularly trying to find. So it's a typical enterprise architecture approach, and this is mostly the perspective used by IT strategists and enterprise architects. And they're trying to figure out what's our current state, looking from cloud readiness perspective, what's our future state, what's the gap, how do we bridge the gap, how do we sequence the roadmap that is most efficient for us. So all of the things that actually create proper road mapping and maturity in the road mapping, we try to actually define within this perspective. Let me show a couple more. Next one, the typical one, is the question that we are getting from our customers. Can you give me a new job description? This cloud is all wonderful. So what do I need? A cloud architect, or do I need cloud developers? Or what are those new roles? Help me to change my team. I can't just give you a job description because every company has a very different job descriptions. So we usually ask customers that we go absolutely back to the beginning. What are your organizational goals? If you remember, 10 slides ago, I was talking about when you create a business plan for the cloud, we find lots of your business goals, organizational goals out in that phase. So we know if, for example, your goal is to manage the cost of IT, we know which capabilities you require for that. And then we can decompose those capabilities into right activities. We decompose activities into the right skills. So ideally, we really want to sit together and define what are all the new skills that your team needs and maybe doesn't have today. And then we start packing those skills. Some of those skills are deeply technical in a cloud. Some of those skills can be organizational skills. Organizational structures are quite different in the cloud compared to traditional siloed. We have developers, and then we have operations, and then we have architects. That's not the right organizational structure anymore. So through that, we actually create the proper accountabilities and assignments and roles that we expect that organizations should have. The other part, so actually that one goes into the people perspective, right? We have a whole bunch of activities and components in people perspective that we are trying to help organizations to adjust the people side. What should be your new organizational structure? It is still a hierarchy. Do you still need to have a top-tier vice presidents and then managers and then workers? Or do we need to change that completely? How do you actually manage the staffing? Where do you go to find new people? We found that large enterprises, when they want to bring new people in for the cloud, they have a very hard time to assess. Somebody applies for a job and says, I am a cloud ninja. How do you know? What do you ask? How do you actually really know that somebody claims that it is super proficient in the cloud? Lots of companies don't even know what questions to ask. They will just go, okay, we believe you, so let's hope together that we are going to the cloud together. So we need to actually have lots of a dialogue about readiness and training and certification. What questions to ask? What are the proofs that somebody is good in cloud versus somebody just read a lot of material and said, well, I heard about the cloud and I can repeat what I read, which is not the same, right? Now, when it comes to the process and we are addressing project managers, it's quite relevant that you understand we are trying to create the IT life cycle at least two speeds. The first speed, which is kind of almost like follow the year, it's kind of starts from the strategy and goes all the way to improvement. So strategy and analysis, design and transition, operations and improvement. For all of the people that remember ITIL, you will probably remember this terminology: service strategy, service design, service transitions. They're all coming from ITIL. We just added analysis in it. So this is kind of the slow cycle. And that slow cycle is still used to match the speed of traditional company. But within the slow cycle, we also want to implement a couple of really fast cycles that are actually doing things really rapidly in quick successive iterations. So the first one, for strategy and analysis, all of the people that are responsible for planning, they need to go super, super fast doing visualization, doing analysis, doing validation, trying the right, very, very quickly, the right direction, the right design, the right strategy, and then move over to the build phase. Build goes through the plan, build, deploy, plan, build, deploy. As fast as possible, you create a rapid machine that is either migrating or creating huge amount of value creation in the shortest amount of time possible. And then goes to the last rapid cycle, where we are doing monitoring and managing and then optimizing the environment, which is the modern type of the operations. So you can see we have a slow speed and a rapid speed at the bottom that is kind of a spinning off that slow rhythm of the governance of the organization. And a whole bunch of other things we put into the process perspective. So process perspective helps in planning and project management, program management, helps all of those functions that are responsible first to define the right speed of delivery, the right delivery process. Are you going agile or are you going waterfall? Or are you going both? By the way, we are recommending to organizations to actually define multiple speeds of projects. If you are building mostly a system that is business critical and it is holding systems of record, which means that it is holding mission critical data, you can't really develop those systems in an iterative, rapid prototyping mode. On the other hand, if you are doing systems of interaction, which are mostly used for eyeballs. They're mostly either web pages or mobile apps. You can do these are systems of interaction. You can do them in a super quick iterations. Maybe you can launch a new version every day or every second day, or maybe several times a day, depending on the type of a business. And you can create lanes in between. So if you are a really large organization, I consulted one organization, we created 5 different speed lanes, from the slowest one, which had the most risky, financially bound type of systems, to the fastest one, and there were other 3 lanes in between as well. Now, to make that complete, we also are addressing security part as well. So we found that security always kind of either supports or blocks everything. So we created a security reference architecture, among other things, that we start to talk about new security models and approaches in the cloud and correlate them with the traditional security approaches on premises. And with that, we want to make sure that all of the people in a security office are never blockers, but always supporters of cloud mission. Because they need to find out through properly defined security strategy and to define through the proper principles, which we call a DevSecOps. So it's like a DevOps with a security injected in the middle. We want to actually help those professionals to see that cloud is actually not more risky, it does not impose greater security threat or anything like that. And usually we find that after we do all of those security-focused activities, security people become extremely good proponents of cloud migrations. So here we go, right? We have those. Oh, and the last perspective, I will not even have a model here. It's operations perspective, which is addressing operation people. People that actually manage systems day in, day out. They're responsible for incident management and problem management and measuring service level agreements and actually making sure that the whole system is healthy. And we need to address all of their concerns because this is no longer ITIL world, by the way. If your organization follows ITIL, there are bits and pieces in ITIL that are still good and still relevant. But lots of ITIL is a little bit obsolete because ITIL was made for humans. We are now talking about machine-driven automation environment. If I'm looking at one of my customers is Netflix, you cannot use humans to control 70,000 machines. There is no way. So the whole traditional incident management doesn't work at all. Incident management of trying to resolve and find the issue and remove the issue. At Netflix, we just remove the node. If the troubleshooting literally means that you shoot the trouble instance and create a new one. So no more troubleshooting, really. There is no more incident management. You just make the one node that behaves cleanly and eliminate nodes that don't. So here we are. We have 7 different perspectives for 7 different audiences. Let me just quickly review that. Business perspective addresses business people in business units that actually want to still do traditional business on top of IT. Platform perspective is primarily focusing on IT architects and IT professionals. Maturity perspective goes after IT strategists and enterprise architects. People perspective tries to talk to people managers, the team leaders, and all of people that care what's going to happen to people when you transition to the cloud. Process perspective is all about project management, program management, and PMO, project management office. Operating perspective tries to address the operational aspect and operational part of the organization. How do you operate all of these environments at the same time? And then security perspective, how do you make sure that your risk profile and security profile is still right and low? Now, you saw all of those little components that I drew quickly through those slide decks. You can imagine that those little honeycombs, now you get all of those possible Lego bricks at your availability on the left side of the slide. Here is the trick. How do you actually use that? You grab, depending on your situation, You grab just the right things out from that bag of Lego bricks, and what you see in the middle, you actually care probably maybe for 10, 20, 50 components, no more. You don't need to do everything. And then you sequence them correctly into organizational structure. Now, let me show you a couple of examples. A very typical one would be application migration, which might be very large as an effort, but it's very simple when it comes how you decompose it. How do you actually make it into a manageable chunks of work? And it's very much just 3 activities. First one is coming from maturity perspective. It's application portfolio assessment, which gives you out the prioritized list of all of the apps that need to be migrated. Second one is creating application migration factory and churn the migrated solutions out. And the third, it's coming from the platform perspective. And the last one is coming from operating perspective, is operational integration. So you have a migrated app, you need to integrate it into operational foundation on the cloud. And you just do those 3 things again and again and again. It's very simple when it comes to a question how to manage application migration. Let me show you one that is not that simple, that is kind of a mid-sized. And it is a practical example from one customer. We started with a business case, and the idea was to actually do everything, right? We wanted to go through a discovery workshop, coming out from a process perspective, wanted to define network environments and then different cloud environments, make sure that the operational integration works and so on. On top of that, we wanted to change organizational structure, we wanted to change on top skills and competencies, and even create a new continuous integration, continuous delivery type of a process. Now, you see that there are a couple of gapping holes. Those holes that obviously something is missing in there, we wanted to have migration factory in there. In case of this customer, we ran out of budget, so we pulled it out. But you can see that you can compose any type of a roadmap specifically for your environment, from small to mid-size to a really, really large one. So the question is, how do you do it if you're really large? Well, we actually start to sequence it down the path of the life cycle. We create one roadmap just to develop the strategy, another roadmap for analysis, a different roadmap for design. You can see that in a design part, there is a lot of purple inside, which means that lots of a platform perspective activities, lots of architectural work in design. And then in operations, you can see lots of blue, which is obviously lots of operational part in there. So with that, as a wrap-up, I hope that I gave you, this was really, really fast overview of a structured framework that helps customers to think about everything that's required to do a good, well-balanced transformation into the cloud. There is a white paper listed. I deeply recommend you grab it. You see link at the bottom. They told me I have to tell you it's a capitalized, so capitalization matters. It needs to be capital letters AWS CAF. If you use lowercase, it doesn't work. So there is a white paper, goes a little bit more in depth and will give you more time to think about it, absorb it. But again, it's a framework. It's just a frame of mind. It doesn't give you any prescribed activities. It just wants to give you a good, well-balanced canvas when you are thinking how to move your organization over to the cloud. It's not just our technology. It's also huge emphasis on people, huge emphasis on processes. It's a lot about thinking about security, about operations, about the business value, about maturity, about all of those different perspectives that I quickly guided you through. And with that, let me wrap up. I will be around. If you need me, please come to me with any extra questions. I don't think we have much of a time to get questions straight from the audience. But thank you so much for being here with me today.
ありがとうございました。